Hello and welcome to my tutorial on how I color my stylized art. I'll guide you through my entire process of coloring, from adding the base colors to the final touches. So let's get started. I love using various brushes in my artwork, so here are my brushes I used in this video. Using different brushes in my artworks gives more depth and add texture to the final artworks. I get asked how I color my anime work, including hair, clothes, and skin. Here is how I create my artwork step by step. Every step is explained. Follow along if you are interested. First, I start adding the base color for the whole character using the amazing selection tool. This allows you to easily fill in the selected area with the chosen color. When adding the base colors, it's a good idea to create separate layers for each element of your artwork. For example, create a layer for the hair, another layer for each part of the clothes, and so on. This will make it easier for you to add shades and lights later on. And here you have it. Once you have your base color in place, it's time to add shading and highlights. Remember to use separate layers for each element of your artwork so you can adjust the shades and highlights easily. Before starting my rendering processes, I like to give you a summary about my shading basics. But what exactly is shading? Shading is the process of creating the illusion of depth and form in an artwork by using values, lights, and dark. It is an essential skill for creating three-dimensional looking objects and backgrounds. The basics of shadings include understanding light sources and how they affect the appearance of objects, as well as understanding the properties of different materials and how they reflect and absorb light. Before adding shades and highlights, I decide on my light source and where my light comes from. It is generally a good practice to have a clear understanding of the light source before adding shades and highlights to the drawing or your painting. This will ensure that the shadows and highlights are consistent with the direction of the intensity of the light source and that the overall lighting in the artwork is believable. Knowing the light source will also help you to create a sense of depth and volume in your artworks, as you can use shadows to define the form of objects and suggest their position in space. Ambient light. Ambient light is an indirect light source that impacts other objects and surfaces. Ambient light refers to the light that is present in an environment or scene without any specific light source. Those colors reflect into the other objects, which change the hues and colors of the objects. It can come from the sky, reflections of surfaces, or any other indirect sources. For example, if the character I'm creating are positioned in an open space with the sky, I will use a light blue color on the character hair, clothes, skin, and so on. Those indirect light sources affected the colors and the hues I'm using in shadings. By understanding the direction and the quality of the ambient light, I can create a sense of atmosphere and mood in my artworks. Clipping mask layers. When I start adding my shades and highlights, I normally use clipping mask layers. But what exactly clipping mask layers? Clipping mask allows you to mask one layer using the contents of another layer, creating a window that shows only the portion of the layers below that is directly underneath the clipped layer. To create a clipping mask, you need to have two layers, the layer you want to mask and the layer you want to use as the mask. The layer that you want to mask needs to be positioned above the layer you want to use as the mask. Let's get started. First, I create a clipping mask layer above the hair base color layer to start rendering. Then, I choose a lighter color from the one I used in the base color and start adding the highlights. I prefer to add the highlights in a circular shape around the heads, as you can see. Then I create another layer to add the shades with the darker color. I start adding the shades under and above the highlights I've created earlier. Ambient light can also impact the colors and hues I'm using in my artwork, so I prefer to have a specific concept for the background before starting, so I can decide on the hues used in the reflected light. Then, with an airbrush, I add some shades and lights and some variation of ambient light. I put in mind what he is wearing and the surroundings when adding the ambient light, like adding the red hues that are reflected to his hair from his clothes and his eyes, and the box surrounds him. I do the same in clothes background and keep repeating the process till I get satisfied with the results. Think about where the light is coming from and how it affects the character. This will help you determine where to place the highlights and the shadows. For example, if the light is coming from the left side of the character, the highlights should be on the left side of the character, and the shadow should be on the right.